p.m. Awesome. 1:32 p.m. I'll call the meeting to order for August 25th Metro Plan TAC meeting. Rosie, go ahead and go for the roll call.
Thank you. Nick Hall, we know, is excused. Jason James.
Present.
Ann Dunno.
Present.
Rick Barrett.
Here.
Nate Reisner.
Here.
Jess McNeely. Not yet here. Dan Folk, also not yet here. Jeff Bauman.
I'm here.
Andrew Iacona, welcome back.
Here, thank you.
We have Ed Stilling.
Here.
And staff would be Jeff Smilbeck.
Here.
Dave Wessel.
I'm here.
And Rosie Ware, present. And that concludes the roll call. I don't see any other attendees.
Dana is on there. Go ahead, Dana.
Oh,
Yeah.
and Dana, yes, thank you. Dana Biskin with Burgess and Eiffel.
Excellent. Thank you, Rosie. Let's go move on to item C under the general business, public comment. Before I open the floor to the public for any comments, Rosie, was there any emails or any messages or anyone that want to make a public comment today?
Chair James, no, there is no public comment.
Okay.
At this time.
And
thank you.
All right. And I don't see anyone from the public today in this meeting, so we will move on to item D, approval of the May 26th minutes. Before we look for approval on that, was there any comments, revisions, any questions from the May 26th minutes? Going once, going twice. All right, looking for a motion to approve the May 26th minutes as is.
Move to approve. This is Ann.
Thank you, and look for a second.
This is Jeff Bowman. I'd second.
Second by Jeff, thank you. All right, all in favor of approving the May 26th, 2021 minutes, please say aye.
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 And all opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, the consent agenda. Jeff, was there anything on the consent agenda for today's consideration?
Mr. Chairman, no, there is nothing on the consent agenda.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on to general business. Item A, the project priorities matrix. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to do my best.
Hey, Dave, there's a little bit of, unless I'm the only one hearing it, there's a little bit of electronic echo there.
To jump in. I'm traveling. We'll be home here shortly.
Okay.
So the priority matrix, this is something the board has asked us to do. It's on our not quite sure what to do about that. Is any better? So the project priority matrix is on our strategic work program. This is an exercise we've been through before and served us well. It's a chance to see what we are all working on collectively and a chance for us to set priorities as an organization. Great. So this year, we basically sent out the last priority matrix with an update, a status update on several of the projects that we have under, and as part of the considerations as one of the criteria, priorities only. And if you're comfortable with the priorities as we have them identified, we'll take them as a staff to the board, seek their approval, and then work them into a multi-year program, similar to what we did before. And we would come back in October with that program for consideration by the board. So the program, Rosie, if you want to scroll up to, okay. Can't understand what I'm saying.
Hey, Dave, this is Jason. So let's see if you can get to a better reception area for your presentation. I hope you're hearing me. Let's kind of, we'll come back to you on the agenda. Just, like I say, again, the better reception area so we can understand everything that you're saying. Jeff, if you don't mind, if it's all right with you, I would recommend that we move on. I think I actually skipped the part A of the fiscal 22 budget discussion. So I feel that we should just have that first, and then we'll come back to Dave when he gets back into a better reception area. Is that all right with you, Jeff?
That sounds good. I'm afraid Dave can't hear what you just said. He thinks we can hear him.
Jeff, is that okay?
Dave? Yeah, you muted. Great. So when you get to better reception, come back on the line. And Mr. Chairman, I think what I heard you say is let's go to the next item, which is the RTAC funding project priorities. Is that
correct?
What you do?
Correct. Yep.
Excellent. And I would say, Mr. Chairman, your voice sounds muffled to me. I can understand it, but if it's possible for you to maybe be closer to a speaker or something, or microphone, that might be helpful. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that. Yeah, it looks like they are.
Okay.
Okay. So my recommendation on this item about Rural Transportation Advocacy Council, RTAC funding priorities, I'm recommending that the TAC approve a project that we identify to pursue $2.6 million of state funding through RTAC. And it's a statewide funding initiative. And the strategic work plan items we have that tie to this effort are that we're really asked as Metro Plan to pursue federal and state earmarks. And we set a target of securing $2 million in additional resources within the next 15 or 16 months. And RTAC represents 10 small councils of government like NACOG and metropolitan planning organizations like Metro Plan and Central Yavapai Metropolitan Planning Organization. And RTAC's mission is protecting and promoting rural and small metropolitan transportation interests, and as well as creating a stronger and more effective rural transportation advocacy network in Arizona. And it's important to point out that Councilmember Regina Salas, who serves on the Metro Plan Board, also serves on the RTAC Board, and Supervisor Geronimo Vasquez also serves on the Metro Plan Board as an alternate to the RTAC Board. So we have connections to RTAC through our elected officials at both the county and the city. And RTAC has been around for 20 some years. And this year they're kicking off a new funding initiative, and it promises to benefit Metro Plan, I think, really in significant ways, because they're looking for a statewide $50 million funding initiative through the governor and state legislature. It's a special budget appropriation. This, I want to be really clear, because I know this has come up from ADOT in the past, questioning if RTAC or if Metro Plan was trying to pull money that was already apportioned to ADOT to some other project? And the answer is definitely not. This is a request from the budget surplus to put money towards infrastructure in Greater Arizona. And let me give you some numbers here of what happened in this last fiscal year. There was a budget surplus of approximately $2 billion, and approximately 310 million was identified for infrastructure. And of that 310 million, 90 million went for pavement preservation projects, about 34 million for really local government projects directly from the state to local governments. And then most of it went to ADOT, as I understand it. And Nate, if you have more information on this, please correct me. But it went to ADOT for them to do more than they would have otherwise been able to do with their existing budget. So I point that out because what we're looking for with our TAC is an ongoing year over year Greater Arizona funding initiative request. And one of the benefits of this approach, and I've got the staff report up on the screen, is that it lets us team up with other small metropolitan planning organizations around the country. Currently, and this year and last year and other years, MetroPlan has gone to our state members of the state legislature and requested a special budget appropriation. Last year, we asked for $5 million. Councilmember Salas did, specifically from Representative Blackman, to put that into the budget as a special budget appropriation, and it wasn't approved at this point. And in some ways, it's difficult for the Flagstaff area to make our case. In some ways, more difficult in other areas that are in closer, elected officials are in closer political alignment and party lines to some of the state elected officials. So it helps us as a region to be able to team up with the rest of Greater Arizona to make a request and stay on point with all the other small MPOs to the state legislature. This is something that works for everyone in Greater Arizona. We are all in agreement, and we have locally identified a project priority that's important to our region, and it's been through our local processes. And for example, here's what MetroPlan wants to do with their $2.6 million apportionment. And what I'm asking for today is for the TAC to identify what project we might want to tell the state we'll be putting this money towards. And the reason that we did the project priorities matrix before this item on the agenda is because that discussion could help inform, this conclusion. But it's okay, we can still work with this. I want to also point out that just because we are looking to team up with the rest of the small MPOs and with our TAC to do a statewide request, it does not prohibit us or anyone else from doing their own independent request of the state legislature or the governor. So from what I see, this is really a collaborative win-win kind of low risk approach that doesn't limit anybody's options, but just increases, I would say, everybody's possibilities of being successful. And our TAC is going to be taking these projects forward in October and identifying for members of the state legislature, exactly where the funding will go if the funding is approved. You can't hear me? Can you guys hear me? Okay.
We can hear you.
Great. Rosie just came in and said she couldn't. So, all right, I'll keep going here. So our TAC wants to, we're going to do a strategic advance and a legislative summit in October, and want to have all 10 of these projects to move forward at once. And that means we need to make a decision, ideally within the next few weeks, as to what project we're going to be promoting. And I also want to point out, and I appreciate your patience with me as I open up a lot of this information. I think it's valuable to identify a project that's going to resonate with the state. So for example, if, and I'm just using this to illustrate, okay? If in Flagstaff, there was a project that is a high priority for us and our members, but we just don't think it's going to necessarily resonate with the state or be supported by the state, we might not want to do our top priority project for the region. We want to ask for support for something that meets really the mission of the funding agency. So I'm afraid that's a little vague, so we can come back around to it as we talk through options. What I put forward here, and I've had some email exchanges with Audra Merrick and with Rick Barrett a couple of weeks ago. What I put forward here was the Lone Tree Corridor. And I'm suggesting that's the highest priority for the RTAC grant for a few reasons. One, it was approved by voters and we can say, you know, we had that support locally. It has local funding. We're also in the process of pursuing federal funding. And construction is going to happen, I believe, and certainly Rick Barrett, correct me if something's changed, but I'll say relatively soon. It's in the pipeline for us to be working this project. So there's momentum behind the project. It benefits the community. It's very tangible. And if the 2.6 million from a special budget appropriation is received, it can be used as match for the federal funds that we, you know, the larger we are pursuing, and certainly the city's pursuing it. And it would also allow the city to use 419 funds on a lot of other projects that have been approved. So in some ways, it seems like the kind of easiest, cleanest project to try to apportion this money towards. And I put a couple alternatives here because, first of all, there's no cost in pursuing the funding. And I put some alternatives. It's not a recommendation. I put the alternative as Lone Tree for the reasons I just mentioned. But the TAC could also say, you know what, we want to approve another project as a priority. There's no wrong way to do this. And I would like to answer any questions. And then if I could, Mr. Chair, turn it back to the TAC for discussion about what might be the most appropriate priority for this funding initiative.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Is there any questions for Jeff on this proposal?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Rick Barrett. I guess I could jump in.
Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. Jeff, if you said this, boy, I apologize because I was paying attention, but can you define what you're thinking of in terms of the Lone Tree Corridor? That's pretty broad.
Yeah. Well, that really is open for discussion in terms from this group and where it might be most appropriate to direct these funds. It's one of the reasons I sent the email to you and Audra a few weeks ago, because it just occurred to me that using the funds for the I-40 bridge, you know, widening and lengthening might be a good use of the money. However, the city is already pursuing the Lone Tree Corridor for the section from J.W. Powell to Zuni. And that's about an $8 million section. And it might be simplest and cleanest to just try to apportion this money there. Should we get either of these grants? We're looking to leverage a federal grant against a state grant in ways that help the local governments. Does that answer your question, Rick?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm reading between the lines, but you're thinking south of Pine Knoll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Way south.
Yeah, I'm just being cautious. So I guess my follow-up question is the RTAC, and boy, I probably ought to know the answer to this one too, but is the RTAC opportunity federalized?
No,
Okay,
it would be state funding.
okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gotcha. Any other further questions for Jeff?
Mr. Chair, this is Ann. I have a comment or a question maybe for Rick.
Okay.
First off, thanks, Rick, for asking the question about federalizing. That was going to be one of my questions. I didn't think it would federalize any of the potential projects the city has for Lone Tree because it sounded like it was state funding. So that's good to have that clarity that it is not federalizing any of the city's project at this point. I guess from Mountain Line's perspective, when we look at this funding opportunity, is first off, broadly, it is a great strategy that Jeff outlined that as a rural community, you know, we're working together with other MPOs to work with the state because we are not close to the hub of the pulse of our state in terms of the politics and funding and how that plays out. So I think it's a great strategy to work with our elected officials and work through our TAC. So I think that's a really positive step for MetroPlan and by nature, all of the partners. I guess from the standpoint of Mountain Line, the project itself for Lone Tree from Mountain Line, we're pretty neutral on it in terms of it being the highest priority and in terms of our overall MetroPlan potential priority projects. Again, we didn't discuss the last agenda item, but I think hearing where Jeff is at on what resonates with the state from that aspect, I mean, I would vote yes on supporting Lone Tree for this if the city is supportive of that, but definitely obviously looking to the city to, you know, hear what Rick has to say and Jeff Bowman. But we're pretty neutral on Lone Tree as an overall priority, but yet would definitely get behind this if this is the will of the group to put forward Lone Tree as the RTAC project. So I just want to put that out there. So probably looking back to Rick and Jeff for what their thoughts are.
Well, Jeff probably hasn't been involved in the discussions. Well, Jeff has been involved with the discussions with ADOT, but not that I had with Audra and Jeff that Jeff mentioned earlier, Jeff Milbeck. Yeah, it's still quite complicated. You know, the I-40 Lone Tree bridges from an ADOT point of view are like 12th on the list of priorities statewide. And unfortunately, that ranking has not put them in the 5-year program yet. Hard to say if they're proverbially in the 6th year or not, but we know for a fact they're not in the 5th, they're not in the 5-year program, which makes it difficult. Because ideally the city would love to rebuild those bridges and partner like we did with ADOT on the 4th Street over I-40 bridges to, you know, leverage any funding ADOT has, you know, toward the rehabilitation, use that rehabilitation fund to reconstruct and the city picks up the difference. I know that ADOT is looking into that possibility. ADOT definitely sees a benefit to, you know, rebuilding the bridges that would allow the additional lanes on Lone Tree. But ADOT sees the advantage of rebuilding over rehabilitation. But again, ADOT doesn't have any funding at this point in time. So I see this 2.6 as an opportunity, quite honestly, more or pretty similarly equal to what the rehab dollar amount might be if it was programmed. So it's, you know, this helps at least accelerate the project. Yeah, and I don't know if opportunities like this are going to exist into the future. Again, we'd like to maximize our possibility. You know, and that other piece, the $8 million piece was Zuni to JWP, and I think that was through a Halloran in the infrastructure bill. I really don't know where that stands. It seems like a lot has changed since that got submitted a while back. Maybe we could get an update there, Mr. Mildbeck. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just wonder if anything's changed or if that's still right on track. But I don't know if that's what you were looking for, Ann. You know, maybe some schedule is, you know, we're focused all our project manager efforts right now on the overpass, which is from Butler North up to Route 66. Of course, that project will extend south of Butler just to make sure we have adequate tie-ins and what have you. That exact point isn't known at this point in time, but I'm thinking Franklin, Sawmill, somewhere in there. Yeah, what would be our next priority? I think, you know, this section, replace these bridges would be a good thing that could happen at any point in time. I think we have a lot of public outreach that we're going to have to do in order, well, I know we're going to have a lot of public outreach to do in order to, you know, get that segment between Franklin and Pine Knoll figured out. That's probably the most, you know, involved public section we got with Kinsey School. Yeah, a lot of pieces in play. Looking for whatever funding we can get, you know, inflation this last year, as we've all experienced, money, yeah, money is a big thing. So we appreciate all these efforts. Over.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond?
Absolutely, Jeff, go ahead.
So I appreciate the discussion, and I noticed that Dave Wessel is back in the room, I believe. And I wonder if it would be possible to hear, you know, his overview of the Metro Plan Project Priority Matrix as part of informing how we're trying to choose to apportion these potential RTAC funds. Is it all right with you, Mr. Chair, if we try to bring Dave in here to do that?
Absolutely. If he's in a better reception area, proceed.
Well, let's find out if I'm in a better reception area. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you, Dave. Yes.
Excellent. I think with your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll go ahead and actually share my screen with the prioritization table. Might be a little easier to see than because it's rotated in the right direction. So, Rosie, do you have any problems if I share the screen?
It's fine with me. I just stopped sharing,
Okay.
Dave.
Okay.
I'm not Rosie, but.
Yeah. All right. Can people see a spreadsheet here?
Yes.
Great. So, you know, to follow up on Jeff's point, you know, we're looking at trying to move projects forward. The projects that we have in the prioritization matrix cover a wide array of project types, from construction to planning. And I think one of the things as we look at these priorities on this page and consider the Lone Tree corridor, I think the context is important in that, as Jeff mentioned in his presentation, we're looking for a project that aligns well with state funding priorities, not just regional priorities. And so that's where Lone Tree, because of some of the possible connections with the I-40 bridges, the scheduling challenges and prioritization challenge, ADOT prioritization challenges notwithstanding, it's where that comes in. There may be some other opportunities. So we sent out this prioritization matrix. We received one set of comments in return. So this is largely a staff recommendation in terms of working the process. And the priorities here are based on an overall score. the way they're ranked right here. The number one, I guess, Jeff, would you like me to go over the process a little bit, or just go right into the priorities?
I think we've been through the process and
Okay.
I think the priorities, but of course the TAC, if they have questions, they can ask.
Okay. So just very briefly, we had three large categories: their regional importance, the need for action, and then what type of involvement Metro Plan could have. And that latter one ranged from leading a planning project to pursuing funding to writing a letter of support. In reworking the priorities this year, the pedestrian and bicycle project still came out as a high priority. We know that we recently got a $6 million grant. That's why I highlighted this. We know also the active transportation master plan is on the list. That's entering the public comment phase, so there's been progress made there. But we still know that that $29 million that was approved in 419 didn't even cover all of what was considered the 5 years of improvements, and that's going to be that was needed or identified in the ATMP process. The $6 million grant helps, but there's still a lot of work needed to be done in that arena. So that's still a good priority project. The downtown mile moved up the list. This is basically Milton and East Route 66 from the Florence Walnut pedestrian underpass to the Lone Tree overpass and all the projects in between. We have a lot of federal funding backing up on that one and waiting for just this kind of coordination and resolution, and a big funding need to perhaps cover that gap for mitigating the railroad impact. So that one's moved up. There is a RAISE grant been submitted for that. So that might be more of a wait and see. A new project was looking at the airport TI and I-17 at I-17, the design and construction. This is moving up the list, with a bullet, as they say, because of the Northern Arizona Healthcare Project. There's also movement on the other side of I-17 with 32-acre research and development park under, I think, concept study. So there's a lot of pressure on this. There may be an opportunity for coordination with ADOT, although this one might suffer because it's too far ahead in the 5-year construction program, and may not be possible to get on board with that one for coordination or cooperation, but that's certainly an important project. The RTP still ranks high. We're obviously underway on that, coordinating with the regional plan, and then another new project, doing a circulation plan for Milton. I believe the Milton CNP is going to wrap up, but I think there's general recognition that the corridor needs more than just the state highway to really function at its best. And the city right now has no, I guess, hard and fast policy for its treatments for parallel roads. So a circulation plan would help there. I'm just kind of working my way through the list. Maybe I'll look at these in a little more state context, state highway or state context. Route 66, planning for Route 8, but also you see further down at near the bottom of the screen, West Route 66 corridor master plan. So there's some opportunities there, but those are also high priority projects. Routes out to the airport, kind of in keeping with the service to the TI, just how we're going to serve development in that area, specifically with NAH, Northern Arizona Healthcare, moving out there. So there's a couple projects out there that might serve as alternates for RTAC, that RTAC funding through the state surplus. But I think the Lone Tree corridor, even though it's relatively low on this list because there's funding in place, because the city had stepped up to take the lead on the corridor planning, in terms of a good fit for a state project or a project that would benefit the broader state. That one's a pretty good fit. The airport TI is not a bad fit. You can see some of the other projects here in the top 20 or 30 ranked. So Jeff, I'll kind of turn it back to you to see if there's some other context you want from this list.
No, well, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'm going to turn it back to you and the rest of the group here in a second. Just really two questions. There's the university Milltown. That might be a place for these funds. And then the other that you have highlighted is the interstate pedestrian crossing at over I-40 that we did a site tour with Councilmember Aslan just about a month ago. I see the interstate pedestrian crossing scoring about 19 in rank. What's the status of did I just miss it? The university, the Milton Underpass at University?
It's here. 29,
Okay.
line 29, and it's ranked 23rd.
Okay.
Can I ask maybe a question for the city, for Rick? I thought that was partially part of the development agreement, so that underpass was being covered with that project. Is there no funding now for that project?
No, the developer, you are remembering correctly. Developer is responsible to pay for the ped crossing.
Can I ask what's the chances of that happening?
Of what happening?
The developer building the underpass anytime in the next 5 years?
We're hoping to have the whole project under construction in April, but I don't know what odds Vegas would give it.
Thanks.
The design of the project is in question right now. Our city council, anyhow, we're going to be bringing our recommendations back to council here in the next couple of weeks, hoping to get clear direction on the design forward.
Mr. Chair, this is Dave. Got a question for Rick.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so Rick, I don't know what the questions the council has in mind on that project, but I know we've heard from a couple different, and I think they're staff members, but female staff members saying, look, we really would prefer a much more open design to make this a more secure feeling facility. Otherwise, at night they would feel compelled to use a surface crossing. If there's is there a chance that this design might come to be required to be a larger scale facility, or would the city be interested in looking at a larger scale facility here where this funding might be useful?
Boy,
I know, it's a lot of speculation I'm asking for.
Geez, Jiminy Cricket, is it ever? I'll just say for the record, the last thing that needs to happen right now is to redesign this tunnel at 90% design. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Which I guess brings me to another question, and this is not getting up on Rick Barrett and ask you to speculate day, although it might feel like it. If funding came through at 2.6 million for this project, based on its current design, is that something that could add momentum to getting the project done and just making it easier for both the city and the developer to complete? I mean, costs keep going up, and maybe it would help.
What's the timing on, question with a question. What's the timing on knowing if we'd be successful on 2.6 million?
At least 10 months.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're trying to wrap up design so we can get under construction. Kind of to Ann's question, when are you guys going to build this darn thing? You've been talking about it forever. And I'm not putting words in Ann's mouth, but man, oh man, we've got design, we got plat, we got development agreement with developers. I got a developer that's getting ready to walk away if this thing changes, maybe renegotiate the DA. There's just so many things that are on the cusp of falling apart. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to speculate. And it could very well be that, our estimates from 2017, when we did a zoning case to actual construction contract in today's construction market, we might need an additional $2.6 just to build the original scope, let alone change in scope. So I don't know. I have no idea where I'm at right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think if it's okay with you, maybe we can hear from other members of the TAC on their perspectives.
Absolutely. I'll open the floor to any other comments, questions in regards to project priorities.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, is that project priorities for the RTAC grant?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are. I am kind of blending them now. I apologize for any confusion that I've created.
Going once?
Mr. Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Nobody else has, maybe I'll have after hearing the discussion, this is my Mountain Line TAC level perspective. I think the approach going for the 2.6 million, I think we should get behind and support. Mountain Line would support Lone Tree really only if the city thinks it would be valuable to their overall project and project delivery process. So it's a little bit of a caveat hedge there. But I guess the question is, if you get 2.6 million through this process, Jeff, can it just be turned over to the city and they can put it in and put it for design or it doesn't really have a lot of, I don't know, nuance attached to it. So I guess that's where I'm at. I really hesitate to open up anything with the university crossing. It sounds really complicated. And frankly, my perspective is there was a deal made with a developer and, it seems disingenuous to then try to bring their project whole with this when there's other needs in the community. So I feel like, let alone the complications of the city's process that they're having. So, I mean, I would support Lone Tree if the city's on board with that. The second choice I would think would be the ADOT TI for the airport area, just with all the development. So that's where I'm sitting.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd kind of summarize with this. I see two really valuable ways of pursuing and using funding like this. One, a project that has already got a lot of momentum and gonna get done, and we're able to replace local funds with another source of funds, so those local funds can be spent on other projects. There aren't strings attached. And then the granting agency sees a project done quickly, and we keep the momentum going, and it creates flexibility for the local government. That's one way. The other is to use the funding to establish momentum for a project we're having a hard time getting off the ground. And I think what I'm hearing from the TAC is that the university underpass at Milton is not an appropriate project for this right now. And it comes down to probably Lone Tree or the airport TI I-17 design and construction. But there's still a lot of questions there about that timeframe. So I think I see it as those two topics, those two items, and I need to work with Dave more on if he thinks that the I-17 airport TI is ready for prime time.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that, and I guess we're just, and it's my 2 cents here is I agree with Ann in the sense that it's really up to the city. It's up to the city. If Lone Tree corridor and the scope that was outlined by Rick is a priority, I would support that. We would support that. So I think it's really ultimately up to the city if they see that as a priority or not. If they do see Lone Tree as priority, I would have no issue motioning to approve that project to pursue the $2.6 million of state funding. But again, I want to make sure that the city, this is ultimately up to the city, and Rick is up to you. So I leave it in your good hands. So what's your thoughts on that, Rick?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm recognizing as I look at this priority chart that there's things that are missing. And that is gap funding, so if we put 2.6 towards the airport, because and Jeff, our traffic engineer, I might want to get him involved here, but probably one of the more important needs we see coming right now is that airport TI I-17. It's connected to a level 1 trauma center, that being Northern Arizona Healthcare. Again, ADOT, same story as I said on Lone Tree and I-40. ADOT has money to rehabilitate, but the needs of the NAH project are a reconstruct and add lanes. So the gap there that I fear is that, 2.6 added to ADOT's rehabilitation money is a good start, but who's picking up the remainder? Because I'm convinced there will be more to reconstruct the I-17 airport TI bridge than just the rehab money ADOT has and the 2.6 RTAC cash. So I think we're missing that part of this decision matrix. But that's not answering a question, is it, Mr. Chair?
Some great information, but
I don't know. I mean, every time these opportunities for cash come up, I look at a list that is just mind-boggling. None of them are the silver bullet. I don't know. I mean, there's a TAC here, for crying out loud. I'd like to hear from other people.
Let me ask a question for you, Jeff Malbeck. So with this funding, is it funding that RTAC and FMP are going to be going to the legislature and asking for, or is it already money given to RTAC by the legislature that RTAC is then distributing through the other communities?
The money has not yet been awarded in any way. It's an advocacy effort on the part of RTAC with Greater Arizona to try to get funding. And part of that approach is to identify which projects we would use the funding for. Does that answer it?
Yes, that does. And that helps me out a lot with what I'm about to say. Going back to the airport TI, I believe ADOT has $5.5 million and is looking at a total reconstruct of that bridge. So widening it, I'm not sure if the 2.6 million would cover widening for the city's purposes. From my understanding, ADOT's proposing just replacing that structure in kind with the ability to widen in the future. So I don't know if that $2.6 million would cover what the ultimate cross section that the city would want. So that's just a little bit more information on that one. For the Lone Tree stuff, if that's something that the city would want to move forward on for Lone Tree projects or a Lone Tree project, from a personal standpoint, from using the transportation network here in Flagstaff, that sounds good to me. But from an ADOT standpoint, we're not supposed to, for our policies, not supposed to officially support any lobbying type efforts for funds outside of our 5-year program. So we can bring you information on what our 5-year program is. If you're lobbying for additional funds outside of what our 5-year program has, either on our transportation system or not on our transportation system, we cannot vote yes or no on it. We can give feedback as to, yeah, we think this project sounds good to us. It sounds like it'll be a good thing for the community, but we're not supposed to vote on asking the legislature for more money for transportation projects.
Thank you,
Nate.
Mr. Chair. I'd like to respond, but as Rick Barrett said, it's a TAC. So if other folks want to speak up, I'd rather hear from them before I speak up again.
Absolutely, Jeff. Any other further comment? I'll put in a comment real quick. Just a couple of comments. First and foremost, Nate, excellent point. Yes. So with these particular items that we have today, even though ADOT, we as ADOT will give our input, again, we have to abstain from the vote ultimately when we come down to it with these funding priorities. Second thing, Rick, you mentioned about the Lone Tree bridges, and I know we're still having internal conversations on that per the meeting we had a few months ago. I would recommend not putting the 2.6 million towards that, just because of what you just mentioned. There's still uncertainty on where we're going to fill the gap of funding for a reconstruct. We are interested in that, but again, where the money is going to come from is still in question. So it's a high risk to put 2.6 million toward, at least to the bridge reconstruct for a Lone Tree. So that's just my recommendation there, not to put these funds at this time toward that. Those are only comments I have, but I'll open it to the floor for anyone else before Jeff jumps in.
Hey, Jason, this is Jeff Bowman. Can I jump in?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jeff.
All right. Screen is flashing. Let's see. So I think that, just speaking to the airport I-17 TI, we're very early with the NAH project, and to the point where we don't have a TIA yet. We're still in kind of the scoping and figuring things out with them. I know they've talked about a very aggressive schedule, but it doesn't feel like, I mean, Jeff, I think you said 10 months on this funding. That seems premature for their schedule as far as combining what would be trying to change the scope of an existing ADOT project, combining this RTAC funding along with potentially city funding or NAH contributions. I think that project just isn't quite timing wise appropriate for this funding source. And then I just heard some kind of similar maybe warning from ADOT on the Lone Tree bridges. So I think, I don't know that I'm helping, but I think maybe I'm helping a little bit by saying maybe those two are not the most appropriate locations.
Yeah. I'm wanting to respond, but I still want to wait if anyone else on the chat wants to.
Understood, understood. Anybody else have any comments or anything?
And again, so just hearing the conversations from Jeff Bowman and Rick and Nate, hearing that the ADOT TI is not quite ready to jump in because the 2.6 could be at risk because there's not enough momentum process-wise to, in other words, you couldn't reach a key milestone with $2.6 million with an, I want to call it an ADOT like project assessment or whatever that initial planning process is, where you could have a stop point that would set you up for the next stage. So maybe I wrapped more into that risk part about really both bridges. I'm hearing that for Lone Tree and the ADOT is 2.6 million doesn't get us to a point where we could complete a certain phase of a project such that next funding could come in later and continue to pick up. Is that correct? Is that what I'm hearing? $2.6 million doesn't get us project assessment or it's maybe a yes or a no. I mean, that's what I'm hearing in the conversation. So I guess when I hear that, I go back to, could $2.6 million help the city on the Lone Tree corridor, not necessarily the bridges, but can you take that 2.6 million and help with their design fees or whatever, you know, whatever phase of the Lone Tree, the rest of the roadway project that's happening. Again, it doesn't appear to federalize it. So that would reduce the local match, obviously help the city shift budget elsewhere. So again, I'll obviously defer to the city, but that's where I'm hearing the conversation. The bridges, TIs, it's a no-go. And anyway, that's, again, I look back to the city for what they would like to do.
And Ann, this is Jason. Yes to your previous question. Sorry, I didn't answer in timely fashion that, but yeah. So, but then the second half I'll leave to the TAC. So, Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple things. There's a lot of deference here to the city, and I appreciate that. The project does not have to be a city project per se. The other thing, just to follow up on Ann's perspective, I know it's early in the Lone Tree overpass, but if there's a sense that construction costs are going up, is $2.6 million going to the Lone Tree overpass perhaps an appropriate use within that Lone Tree corridor? And then finally, Head and Bike is still at the top of the list. I don't know that that's necessarily appealing to a statewide project list, but it's still at the top of ours. So thank you.
So I have another question. Dave, you've done a lot of work on this ranking, these project rankings. ADOT, when we do our project rankings, our P2P project rankings, our top project is the one that we fund first. So why are we trying to take the rankings that you've done and trying to prioritize them? Why aren't we just taking the top ranked project and trying to move forward with that one with whatever grants and funding that you guys can bring in?
I'm going to defer to Jeff Milbeck on that one.
I appreciate the question, and I understand as an independent organization who, like when I worked for another organization, we would pursue our primary objectives. Metro Plan is in a place of trying to meet everybody's needs in the best way possible, and we are still very young in this way and wanting to bring everybody in and talk through these processes. So that's generally the answer. The specific answer is, for us to get this funding, we want to be able to put it towards something that we can definitely, pursue, so that it is a request that resonates with the state. And as I hear the discussion, what I'm getting is some of the other projects like the Milton Underpass and the bridges on I-17, they're just not ready. The bridges on I-40 at Lone Tree, they're just not ready. And what I take from this discussion is that putting the money towards and identifying a project like Lone Tree writ large somewhere where the city can use money that doesn't federalize a project, I mean, I think that's a hard amount of money to turn down. Or even the Lone Tree Railroad overpass, to, as Dave pointed out, prepare for the possibility of escalating construction costs so that that project could be completed without biting into other projects the city wants to do based on what voters approved. So really just trying to find the right fit for a new organization that's looking at a new funding initiative through our TAC. This has never been done before. So, Mr. Chairman, we only have about a half an hour left. We spent a lot of time on this. There's more on the agenda. I really appreciate the discussion. What I feel like, based on everything we've discussed, is that I need to recommend, I would recommend what I started with in the first alternative, put the funding towards the Lone Tree Corridor. I heard some deference to the city of Flagstaff. I don't know that I heard a response from Rick Barrett, but I would just ask it this way. Is there any reason the city wouldn't accept $2.6 million to do a project that's already been approved by voters, that's slated for construction, that's probably facing escalating construction costs, and that doesn't federalize it in any way? Is there any reason the city wouldn't accept that money?
Mr. Chair, this is Rick. Simple answer is, yeah, we would accept it with open arms.
Thank you.
And I may even have to back up a step and say I'd accept it with open arms for the Beulah University project as well, for the reasons I already stated. I'm concerned about schedule on that one. I mean, I wonder, and you probably don't have the answer to this question, but as I've sat here thinking about it, I mean, could we get granted this RTAC money and have already started construction of our project? It seems awkward, but maybe that's a fair question to ask.
It is. This is a different kind of funding source. It really is a legislative earmark. So the rules for, aren't really made up yet. No strings have been attached to it yet. Might there be? I'd be in a position of speculating. What I'd like to think, Rick, is that, and everybody who's on the TAC, if we identify the Lone Tree Corridor, again, all this momentum behind it, it makes a strong case. Even if there aren't cost overrides, if we spend $2.6 million of state funding, that frees up, theoretically, $2.6 million of city funding that can be spent on another project.
Yeah, I follow you. It's a good call. I certainly support that, Jeff.
Okay. Thank you.
How about Mr. Bauman? What do you think on that one?
Yeah, this was challenging, kind of going round and round a bit, but yeah, I'm comfortable right there as well.
Okay, and let me jump into this, Jason. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. So right now we have two motions we're going to put on the table. The first one, of course, is to adopt the project priorities for Metro Plan and recommend adoption to the board for the project priorities matrix. And the second motion would be to approve the Lone Tree Corridor project to pursue the $2.6 million of state funding through the RTAC initiative. Am I correct on those two motions that you're looking for?
Outstanding. Yes, you are.
All right, let's get the party started then. First motion, looking for a motion to adopt the project priorities as presented by Metro Plan staff and recommend adoption to the board.
Mr. Chair, Rick Barrett here. I would move to approve as stated.
Thank you, Rick. And looking for a second?
This is Ann. I think we need to discuss what the priorities are. They're not clear to me. I thought that was the first agenda item, so I think we're out of order.
That was the first agenda. Yeah, I'm going back just to make sure. Yeah, that was the first agenda. Basically, and again, Dave, fill in if I'm mistaken in describing this. It's just basically that the project priorities matrix that Dave presented earlier, that we are good with the way those projects were prioritized, and to present that to the board. That's kind of just a summary that I got. Dave, anything to add to that?
No, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. And Ann, did you have any further questions on that or any concerns on that?
I do. I actually don't, based on the staff report, I actually don't know what the planning projects that Metro Plan will lead. They were going to identify 3 to 5 funding projects that Metro Plan will lead 3 to 5. I cannot understand. I mean, I understand all these rankings of different projects. They mix those different roles. And if I was I don't understand
Yeah.
the punchline of what the list is. So I would
Yeah, Mr.
appreciate
Chair.
tabling that if we could to the next, for time. If we don't need an expedient decision on that, if we could table that for next meeting.
If I could speak to that very briefly, Mr.
Go
Chair.
ahead, Dave.
So the idea, Ms. Dono, is that we will take the priorities and then fashion them into those, to the program that would say, here's our top planning efforts and what we will do. Will we lead those? Will we support those? These are our top construction projects. Will we pursue funding? What our roles will be? But we'll start with this priority list in order to fashion those.
So from that priority matrix, can you just can you identify for the record what they are? Because I had a really hard time following it. And I recognize other TAC members are probably, I'm getting to the point where I'm trying to follow some of the bouncing balls on these different projects. And I really need the summary. I mean, when I read that matrix, I am lost. So I would really, before I approve or participate in voting, I want to make sure I'm behind what are the priorities that Metro Plan is identifying.
So, Mr. Chair, Member Dono, what I'm hearing is your preference is to have both the priorities and our programmatic response to those simultaneously, as opposed to trying to split them up in order.
Right, and maybe I thought the priorities were projects. So maybe it's just what are your project priorities?
Again, Member Dono, I'll look to Jeff to perhaps Jeff Wildbeck to pick this up, please.
I appreciate everybody's engagement. We've got about 20 minutes left and a lot of other stuff. Dave, do we have to have these priorities adopted today, or can we push this to next month and reformat the recommendation in a way that
we can do that.
Okay, why don't we do that, Mr. Chair? I know there's a motion on the table, but I didn't hear a second, and I would just request that staff be given an opportunity to bring this back in a clear recommendation next month.
Fair enough. We'll take that motion off the table and we'll table that for the agenda for next TAC meeting. Moving on to item B then, looking for a motion to approve the Lone Tree Corridor project to pursue $2.6 million of state funding through the RTAC statewide initiative. And don't be shy.
This is Ann. I move to approve.
Thank you, Ann. And looking for a second?
This is Jeff Bowman. I'd second.
Excellent. And for the before we go to all the yays and nays, Nate, you said you abstain for this vote, correct?
Right.
Correct. All right. And I will also.
I don't think it's a good one. I think it is a good one, but I just cannot, from an ADOT standpoint, I cannot say ADOT votes for it because it's
Understood.
for additional money.
Understood. So please record for the record. Myself and Nate have to abstain from this vote, just for the reasons that Nate stated. And with that said, all in favor of this motion, please say aye.
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 And all opposed. All right, motion carries. All right, moving on to item C. I know we have only a few limited time left, so I'll let you go with it, Jeff. Mini grant.
Okay, thank you. I think I can do this one pretty quickly. This is a mini grant, and last year we did a $50,000 mini grant. This year we're recommending that the TAC consider and adopt criteria for a competitive mini grant to member agencies of $210,000. And it's in our strategic work plan. We were asked to continue this project or this program. And very briefly, when MetroPlan was formed or reinvented, there was some feedback that we'd really like to see some of the funding continue to be passed through to member agencies for projects. So in addition to pursuing new funding to bring in, there's a request to move some money through competitively. So that's what we did last year, recommending we do it again this year. And the project criteria, I'm going to scroll down to, have not changed significantly. When we did it last year, we put money towards bike and ped projects at the city. And this year we just added a criteria for social equity. So if you see on your screen, item number 5, some project preference for those projects that meet the needs of Title VI populations. Other than that, it's pretty much the same. And we've got a time frame here of asking the board to adopt these criteria next week. And then we open the process in September, October, and award the grant in November. And Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions and would also appreciate a motion if the TAC is feeling ready to do so.
All right. Any questions, any comments? Going once, going twice. All right, looking for a motion then to adopt the criteria for this competitive MetroPlan mini grant to member agencies of $210,000.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, this is Dave. This is perhaps a reminder to Jeff Milbeck. The next item is the West 66 corridor master plan, and where we may discuss the possibility of shifting funds out of this program into that. Do you want to speak to that before we receive a motion?
Oh.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dave. And I'd like to go ahead and get the motion. And then also I had a request from Dana Biscayne here to go to the RTP update next.
Okay.
So I understand what you're saying, Dave. I think we can manage it.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you, Mr.
So,
Chair.
no problem. Thank you, Dave. Still looking for that motion?
Mr. Chair, this is Rick. I apologize. I'm confused as to what the motion is. It's not what I'm looking at on the screen.
No, it's not. That's the West Route 66 planning process. You will go
okay.
back to the mini grant right there. Basically,
Thank you.
consideration and adoption of the criteria for the competitive MetroPlan mini grant to member agencies in the amount of $210,000.
Well, I certainly support the mini grant program, so I will move to approve.
I'll second that one.
Thank you, Nate. All in favor, say aye.
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 And all opposed? All right, motion carries.
All right.
And Jeff, okay, go ahead, Jeff. You said you had the RTP update?
I would like to introduce Dana Biscayne. If you could do an RTP update. Dana is our project manager for Burgess and Maple to do our regional transportation plan. Is doing a lot of work already, doing a great job. And to you, Dana.
Thank you. And I think it's going to ask for permission for sharing my screen. Let me know when you can see it, please.
We can see it.
Okay, great. And thank you for letting me move up in the agenda. I apologize. I got a message that my boyfriend had his tonsils out on Friday and he's bleeding excessively and going to the ER. So I've got to go get him. So anyways, I apologize. Kind of extenuating there. Oh dear, it's on the wrong screen.
You should go now.
Yeah, I just got the message, so.
I second that.
Yeah,
You can do this next month. Dana, seriously, you can do this next month. Go to your
Yeah.
boyfriend now. That is a critical situation.
He's going. I have to take him though,
Okay.
back because they're gonna have to knock him out and he won't be safe to drive and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm obviously concerned. But he's en route. So, and Jeff, you've presented this slide to the advisory committee. If you'd like to explain this one for this group's benefit as well.
Sure. The idea of this flow chart is to make it a little clearer because these processes get really cumbersome sometimes. So what it's designed to point out is if you've got this regional transportation plan advisory group. As a reminder, we have folks, former elected officials like Scott Overton and Charlie Odegaard and Art Babbitt, and sustainability folks like Nicole Woodman and Brian Peterson, Chamber of Commerce, Heidi Hansen, Josh Mayer from NAU, Joe Galley, just all involved to help provide some guidance on this effort. And we have the technical advisory committee, all of you. You all provide input to me, and then Dave is the project manager with MetroPlan who takes this input and shares it with Dana and her consulting team. And then they do work with it and bring it back around and it goes through these groups again. And we just keep going through this process, hopefully of coming up with a plan that everybody is aware of and buys into bit by bit as we progress.
So just to provide an overview of this RTP and some general context for it. So this RTP will be advancing for scenario 1, looking at the transportation infrastructure funding and projects identified through Prop 419 and 420. So rather than your typical RTP where you're developing a list of transportation improvements that are needed, we're going to be developing a policy-based RTP. So we're evaluating 2 scenarios as part of this effort. The first, which is based on the current land use plan and those projects, and we'll look for opportunities to enhance sustainability as a part of the scenario 1, the current land use plan scenario. We're also going to be evaluating a sustainability focused scenario. And this really ties back to the carbon neutrality plan of the city, in which case we would be making changes beyond those previously scoped, looking at changes in land use, density, types of infrastructure constructed, things like that. And that kind of helps provide some context on what would need to happen or one way to get to the carbon neutrality goals established. So, and again, there's a number of different paths that could be taken. The plan is going to include quite a bit of public engagement, and which includes a statistically valid survey that'll be conducted here in the first 2 weeks of November to determine the values of the public. And then we're also coordinating with other ongoing planning efforts. We've had a few meetings now with our partners working on the regional plan. We've talked with the city about the carbon neutrality plan, the active transportation master plan, different voting initiatives. There's several things that are underway within the region. So again, trying to find some synergies between those efforts and share information so that the plans can leverage each other's strengths. Dave, you have your hand up?
oh, I'm sorry, no,
Oh, okay.
that's left up from before.
Sure. Okay. So just our scope, task 1 is generally project administration. Task 2, current socioeconomic trends and transportation conditions. 3 is basically modeling work. 4 is developing those 2 scenarios. 5 is our public engagement. 6 is developing the plan, and 7 is the equity and accessibility analysis. So I'll quickly go through these, but basically task 1, the deliverable is a work plan, and then we're continuing engagement with the advisory committee, the TAC, and the public. Task 2, we're conducting a literature review. as well as looking at the socioeconomic data. Literature review topics include measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, looking at trends in micromobility and land use, etc., and those impacts, and travel demand management strategies. And then looking at other trends such as work from home, the Amazon effect, different things to roll into that plan. So we'll be preparing a literature review and relevant trends report. Task 3, there's a lot of information about the model. I simplified this one to just note that we're updating the model and we'll be calibrating the model. And as I mentioned, we're basically exploring 2 scenarios, one that has the 2045 current land use plan, and then one that's got a sustainability focus. So both plans will be looking at the land use funding analysis based on likely funding, revenue projections, validating the construction costs for the projects that we've identified. And then we typically do, or we will be doing a feasibility check, which is basically, sometimes with something like an RTP, if you say, okay, we'll add a bike lane to this road, but you don't actually look at the physical constraints, it might be something where there's a row of power lines there or power poles there that would significantly increase the cost. So making sure that those major features, just to do a check to make sure the costs that we're developing are realistic, as well as coming up with programming sequence for those projects, operation and maintenance costs, and then we'll be evaluating performance metrics for both scenarios. The metrics we anticipate will be similar, but we do expect to see, to use the terminology that the advisory committee and regional plan group has used, we're looking to see the needle move more on scenario 2, especially as it pertains to sustainability. So while the things that we measure will likely be the same, we do anticipate that there would be substantially different results between the 2 scenarios. Task 5, for our public engagement, we're anticipating branding, the use of social media, online engagement, again, a statistically valid survey, and we anticipate in-person outreach. We're currently working with a 3-month look ahead for a public involvement plan, as things are still fairly nimble, let's say, from COVID. And again, there are so many other plans. So we're trying to integrate our efforts as well as we can to not all be conducting the same types of outreach at the exact same time and cause confusion and overload for the public. What we find is when there's 5, 6, 7 plans going on at the same time that have some similar themes, if we can consolidate our outreach, basically the public won't get asked the same question by 3 different plans and not know if they've already responded or not, or be frustrated that they were just asked for something. So again, working with the other agencies that are currently conducting transportation related plans, as well as the carbon neutrality efforts. Task 6 is to develop the plan. So we're going to make a very public facing plan that would be heavy on graphics with some of the technical information in an appendix. And then we'll be developing recommendations for policies and the impacts to potential economic development, environmental, and transportation system. So again, this plan is seeking to answer the question, what it means to be the finest transportation system in the country. And then for the equity analysis, we will be looking at Title VI populations and their access to jobs, medical services, groceries, recreation services, and education. And as we work through our scenario development, basically we'll take the results of scenario 1 and help use those. So for example, if we feel that we want that there needs to be better accessibility for those communities, we'll adjust the projects in scenario 2 to reflect that. So it'll be iterative. This is our schedule. So we anticipate conclusion by October 2022. And we are currently working on the literature review and relevant trends. Beginning in the new year, we'll be developing scenario 1. And once we have some of the base pieces of that, or pretty solid handle on that, we'll move into scenario 2. And again, we want the results of scenario 1 to inform what we do for scenario 2. So they won't be necessarily concurrent development. Thus far, we've completed the work plan. We've been engaging with Flagstaff, Coconino County, and NAPDEP. The literature reviews are in progress and the data collection is in progress. We are pending some stakeholder meetings anticipated in September and the statistically valid survey in November. And if anybody has any questions or comments.
Thank you, Dana. I really appreciate that presentation. Yeah, so any comments, questions regarding the presentation today by Dana?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is Rick. I have a question that may not be easy. Dana, can you explain what the enhanced sustainability is? And what I'm looking for is, are you going to be modeling something that shows a 10% reduction from 2020 traffic to 2030 traffic? And how?
So I believe what we're currently charged with is to match the 2019 VMT levels. And again, the carbon neutrality elements for transportation. So
So you're holding 2019 steady?
For scenario 2.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
For scenario 2.
Yeah, okay, so 2019 stays steady, okay. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, if I could add to that. So this is Dave. And so we'll be looking at land use changes, transportation mode changes, maybe road system changes to go with the land use, kind of everything in the kitchen sink to try to reach that goal. Either, we'll take the model as far as it will go, and then we'll take best practices, peer city, whatever we can find to try to get us to that goal and make a best scenario for reaching that goal.
Dave, is there a reason you're not chasing the council's stated policy of a 10% reduction by 2030?
Our understanding is that the council goal through the carbon neutrality plan is to hold VMT at the 2019 level.
Well, yeah, you may want to confirm that, because I understand it to be a 10% reduction from the 2019 level by 2030.
We'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that.
Go ahead, Jeff.
We had a meeting with the Regional Transportation Plan Advisory Group this morning at 10 o'clock. And this discussion came up, and it was a really fascinating discussion where on one hand, we have the voters who have approved projects in 419 and 420 and said, go get these things done. Here's the money, do it. And then on the other hand, we have the carbon neutrality plan and emissions reductions with specific targets. The approach with the RTP, and maybe threading the needle is an apt metaphor on this. That's why we have two scenarios. And one is to say in scenario 1, we will build out the plan as approved with current land use patterns and approved projects and see how that looks 25 years into the future, doing what we can within those confines, within those parameters for sustainability, and then say, what does that look like? How will that plan affect? And then to what happens of what changes might be required. And we're in the space right now where we discuss with the advisory group, and I'm sharing with you today, how we kind of negotiate that process, how we find that blend. And Dana, do you have anything you want to add or clarify to what I just said?
No, I think that was a good way to state it. Well, and just to add, with the RTP, there are federal requirements through FHWA and others that dictate what the transportation plan has to evaluate. So again, we're somewhat constrained on our scenario 1, which is why we're looking for latitude in scenario 2 to achieve those sustainability goals as established through the carbon neutrality plan and other efforts in the area. So we're certainly respectful of those efforts, since not all of the necessary changes to achieve those goals have been enacted, perhaps changes in land use, things like that. And with the Prop 419 and 20, we do need to evaluate the kind of status quo, so to speak, current land use scenario.
Excellent, thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, hearing none. Dana, again, thank you very much for the presentation. Really appreciate it. Now go sprint to the hospital.
That's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
Have a good one.
All right, you too.
Thank you, Dana.
All right, and Jeff, just clarify too. We're on till 3:30, correct?
We are.
All right, excellent. Then we're good. So. Excellent. In that case, then let's move on to item D, the West Route 66 planning process. Dave, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So right now, staff is recommending that the TAC support launching the 66 planning effort at a cost of $100,000. Straight from our work plan is the initiation of this planning process by the end of this calendar year. This project was prioritized at the last strategic advance. It ranks pretty high, as you saw in the priority project matrix. There's a number of reasons to advance this project. Mountain Line is looking to extend service, improve service. We have a lot of development in this area. There's Proposition 419 money dedicated to this project. And so just determining, our path forward and helping prioritize, cross sections, prioritize bus stop locations and other things are important. We've had conversations with the city and ADOT and Mountain Line about the things that need to be accomplished through this effort. And we believe many of them can, but perhaps not all of them can, unless there's additional funding brought to bear. We are entering into this process on the heels of the corridor master plan for Milton and 180. And we've learned a lot. One of the things is, let's be clear on policy direction early. Let's have a solid public participation plan. Those things were eventually resolved through this process, and I think we can get those things solidly up front. We've heard a request for determining just how far the 5-lane section should extend. It's fairly well complete, or it is complete, from Milton to 66. From Milton to Woodlands Village. And then the question is, how much further west does it need to go to Woody Mountain or all the way to Flagstaff Ranch? Questions about intersection solutions. I believe Thompson meets warrants. And there are questions whether standard signalized intersections are appropriate, or if there are alternate intersection designs such as roundabouts that are needed for consideration. And the current RTP, it calls for the evaluation of alternative intersections in that corridor because it does not have a strong supporting network. And in those cases, those unique intersection designs may be more appropriate. As I mentioned, stops and crossings, and for pedestrians and bicycles, looking at forecasting pedestrian bicycle volumes. I don't even know if the crossing issue has been fully resolved under the Milton Corridor Master Plan, but part of the challenge for planning for those was, what kind of warrants might we meet? And even though current policies are still in place, forecast of pedestrian and bicycle volumes may provide better insights into pedestrian and bicycle facility planning. So some of the other things, looking at impacts from I-17 and I-40 to make sure that nothing is causing undue concern for those interstate facilities. And then looking at the climate action, carbon neutrality, and opportunities there. So probably the thing that we almost certainly could not afford under with $100,000 budget is really looking at grading and drainage in any serious way. There's quite a few significant drainage issues in the area, certainly widening the roadway in places can complicate that. But we could look at cross sections and identify areas that need further study. So we're looking at a schedule that could lead to a notice to proceed in next summer. We had earlier called for a possibility of starting in spring, but by waiting for later in the summer, we think this better aligns with the regional transportation plan schedule. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to get too far ahead of that. And we think that coordination, as you heard Dana describe, will be easier in our public participation process if we're push this back a little later in the schedule. So we're looking at Metro Plan managing this project, and we'll work closely with ADOT on defining roles and responsibilities ahead of the project launch. That we want a plan that's going to be functional and accepted by all parties, including ADOT. So our alternatives is to go ahead and launch with a $100,000 budget. Item number 2 is to try to coordinate with Mountain Line on using some of their funds, but really believe after several discussions with them, that's not an opportunity to pursue. And then a third alternative would be to possibly shift some of the funds out of the mini grant that was approved earlier into the 66 scope to increase the size of the budget from 100,000. So the recommendation is to go ahead and launch at $100,000 and with a notice to proceed scheduled for summer of 22. Be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent, Dave. Thank you for that. Any questions or comments? Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm hearing no questions or comments. Put out the motion for staff recommended to support launching the West Route 66 planning effort at a cost of $100,000. And looking for a motion. Are you going? Oh, Ann, are you going for the motion?
Go
Nope,
ahead.
okay.
Well, Jeff Bowman just unmuted, so.
Okay.
You're looking ahead. Sure. This is Jeff Bowman. Yeah, I would make the motion to recommend launching the West Route 66 planning effort for $100,000 in fiscal, well, I guess it's this year.
Thank you, Jeff. Looking for a second.
This is Ann. I'll make a second.
Thank you, Ann. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Awesome. Moving on to resolution process. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in the interest of time, I'd like to just touch on this lightly and bring it back for discussion later. It's not particularly time sensitive, but I think it is sensitive in terms of an issue. And, I'm recommending we have an open discussion about Metro Plan's role in resolution of issues between member agencies. And it really comes out of the strategic work plan. Our 5-year horizon is to be the kind of an organization that, sets the table and facilitates communication between organizations, and we advance things together. And one of the objectives that came out of the advance was to develop this structured, a transparent process to bring issues to the table in a timely way. And my goal here is to have something brought back, 9 months from now, almost a year from now. And what I just want to share by way of introducing this is some information in the background. We want to speak with one voice, and the fact is, and it's not a bad thing, it's just a reality, member agencies don't always agree. And somebody who's on the outside might say, well, you're all transportation organizations, what's there to disagree about? And as we know, there's a lot of different ways to get projects done, and a lot of different ways to prioritize things. And an example of that is with BRT. I mean, clearly, Mountain Line is very focused on transportation, public transit. And historically, ADOT is much more focused on roads. I asked ADOT, and I don't know if I put the number in here, but I did get some information. About 96% of the ADOT's funding is on roads, about 4% for public transportation. So that has a huge impact on the culture and the priorities of the organization. And I like the perspective that these differences are a strength. It's not a weakness. And I wonder if there's a way for Metro Plan, when there are disagreements, to try to set a table, so to speak, and bring some facilitation. On the other hand, I got to tell you, it feels like stepping in and saying, oh, I'd love to be a marriage counselor. It sounds like pretty difficult work, and don't know if it's the kind of space that Metro Plan is ready to walk into. I do want to use this analogy, though, to a city manager, because it's come up before that, a city manager doesn't work for a council member, works for the full council. And it could be said that Metro Plan doesn't work for any one member agency, it works for, everybody together. And we find consensus solutions. I think, again, in the interest of time, I just want to throw it out there. I know you've probably had opportunity to read this staff report. And what I'd like to hear, just generally, if it's not too awkward of a topic, is do TAC members feel like there is a role for Metro Plan to be doing some kind of identification of issues and trying to find resolution between agencies? Or do you feel like that's something we should just let breathe a little bit and just really not ready to step into yet, or somewhere in between? That's what I'd like to get a sense of from the TAC, if anybody's willing.
Yeah, Jeff, I'm willing. And I think you've categorized it well. Do you mind me asking, where did this come from? Did I see at the top that the board asked you to pursue this?
Yeah, it came out of the strategic advance.
Out of the advance.
I don't know exactly who it came from or how, but it made it through the review process as a measurable objective. that the TAC adopted and the board adopted a few months ago.
Yeah, fair enough. See, I see the city manager having a distinct role as compared to the 7 electeds. I mean, these 7 electeds are the city manager's boss specifically. Hire, fire. Yeah, so I don't know that that's a fair analogy for Metro Plan and its member agencies. I see all agencies being equal as we sit here at the table. So I don't know that it's Metro Plan's place to have a facilitator role. I think your voice at the table as, one of the seats at the round table is more important than to be a facilitator or marriage counselor, as you put it, but that's my 2 cents. I probably need to think about it more.
Thank you. And we can bring this back to, if you want to just chew on it a bit, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, and I'll make a quick comment on this one before we move on with the rest of our agenda today. Just a real quick comment. If you're asking my opinion, somewhere in between. You gave the 3 options, somewhere in between. To Rick's point, I think that a lot of the issues that may come up, especially controversial issues, especially with the Metro Plan, is a compliment to all of you. You do a really good job of just putting your agreements, disagreements out there, but then at the end of the day, keeping civil about it. And I can say for other regions that I've been representing, it's not so smooth. You know what I mean? So I think it's to answer your question from my perspective, Jeff, it's a case by case basis. Sometimes you really don't need to intervene more than your current role, but I think with certain issues you do. It really, certain things can really be a small fire that turns to a big fire that can cause some division amongst member agencies, especially with your, dealing with, ADOT, FHWA, things like that, outside of the Metro Plan region. So I think it's a case by case basis. It's a very hard question to answer because it's, every case is different. But I think for the most part, I don't think you really need to in this region, to Rick's comment. So that's kind of my 2 cents there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And, I want to be responsive to my board and what I'm hearing here. And I think I'll bring this back next month. But I could certainly imagine going back to my board and saying, we discussed this, and it feels like it might be a case by case basis. At some point, there might be a role for Metro Plan or another organization to play. But it's not the kind of thing where we want to structure a policy. We just want to keep our opportunities open, recognizing that we're all in this together. And we'll find the best way to work together because historically we always have, and there's no reason to suspect that we wouldn't continue to do so.
Agreed.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. If there's no further comments or questions on this, we'll move on to the agenda. I know we've already covered item F, the Regional Transportation Plan update with Dana. So we'll move on to item G, Northern Arizona Healthcare Hospital relocation. Dave, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Some time ago, we agreed that this would just be a standing item. It's of the Northern Arizona Healthcare relocation is such a large project with many implications for regional transportation and shifts in demand and travel patterns. But we just wanted to keep tabs on this. So at this point, if Jeff Bauman would be so kind, I'll look to him to give us an update on how that project is progressing. There was already some allusion made to it earlier. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Jeff Bauman. He'll step up.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, not a ton has changed in the past couple of months, surprisingly, and that's part of where I was coming from earlier. Let's see, what has happened recently? The step before a TIA is submitted is a scoping step. So we received final scoping documents from NAH just a week or 2 ago. The city, the county, ADOT, and Mountain Line are reviewing that scoping document. It's a little more in depth than a typical scoping document. So when they get into the TIA, they'll be moving quickly. One thing that has happened based on this timing, you know, and some other projects that people may be familiar with, we've struggled to get counts, vehicle count or ped count or bike count or anything during COVID for the last, I'll say, a year and a half. We'll go with a year and a half. But the last year and a half, counts have not been real reliable, and we've had to be really creative. NAH has taken enough time that they're going to go ahead and just start counting here in September after NAU and public schools all seem to be back in session and things are relatively normal. They're going to go ahead and do counts, so that's kind of exciting. We'll have a chance to compare those to historical data to see where we stand, but we think things are on the roads getting back to relative normal. So that's a good thing. We've really had to jump through a lot of hoops on some of these other projects. So that's kind of where we're at. Counts will be happening in September. We're reviewing the scope of the TIA, and we're expecting, if things just keep progressing, to see a TIA early this fall. And that's probably when we should get back on the agenda. Though I don't mind every month just checking in, but I think we'll have real things to talk about in several months from now.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate that. Any comments or questions at this time for Jeff? Yes, Anna. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, just a little thanks, Jeff, for the update on sort of the TIA process and scoping. Mountain Line has been in discussions with the hospital about a future transit route. So we're trying to identify rough costs right now. Don't know where that will lead, but right now operating costs for a transit route are roughly $1 million to $1.5 million a year. So I'm sure Kate Morley will be coordinating through this scoping review. It sounds like, Jeff, that Mountain Line's looking at that scoping document with the city. But, you know, certainly one of the challenges our agency will be faced with is if we can't figure out how to fund this, we potentially could be looking at cuts to service in other parts of the community, which nobody wants to have to go there. So, you know, these are the things that our agency is working on related to this project. And I understand Mountain Line would love to be able to have a conversation with the city from a traffic TIA standpoint, is looking at potentially some of those mitigations that might be required of the hospital, is to start to look at what transit, you know, a little bit of how that can chip away at some of those mitigations from a capital standpoint. And maybe there's some tricks to cover some of the operating funds. So I wanted to put that out there just in your thought process, Jeff Bowman, and Metro Plan as well, just for that consideration. But there's a lot. This item comes to our board almost every month for updates. In fact, I believe in September, our board will be looking at this, the TAC. Jeff Bowman, I think you do sit on the TAC still. So you'll be seeing this from Mountain Line side at our next meeting. So just a little bit of updates on the transit side related to this project.
Excellent. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate that. Any other further comments or questions? All right, excellent. I know we got 5 minutes left, so no remaining items or for you, Jeff, for the executive board agenda, the current items and future agenda items. So I'll let you take the rest of those agenda items away. Go for it, Jeff.
Thank you. I think I can be pretty brief here. The executive board agenda is so far identical to the TAC agenda that you just reviewed. I don't think there's anything else on there that you haven't seen. I do want to share a few items related to just this fiscal year 22 Rebuilding American Infrastructure, this RAISE grant. It was submitted, $3.5 million. Kudos to the city and Mountain Line and everybody who was involved in getting that grant submitted. Don't know when we'll get an announcement, hopefully this fall. There's not a lot of information in the next two bullets. I was and I just have to acknowledge, I was on vacation last week, somewhat unexpectedly. I thought I'd have more connectivity, but I didn't. And so I didn't update these bullets, but Dave has submitted the grant for ATC MTD, basically smart signals and congestion management. And that went in last week. And that's also based on an intelligent transportation system strategy. Dave, I want a huge amount of work in this, and I know you've worked so closely with the city and ADOT on it. Is there anything you want to say about these two items?
Thank you, Jeff. I just appreciate the team effort. A lot of crunch time there at the end. You think you have these things under control, and then you get down to the wiring, and there's just a lot more work than perhaps you anticipated, but I think we got it all done. I think it looked pretty solid. So I want to thank everybody for that effort. And then on the ITS strategy, you may recall we put that on hold in order to focus on the grant. So we'll be picking that back up as staff and hopefully wrap that up this fall.
Thank you. And then the Milton corridor, looking for September 3rd. Dan and Gabio said they're hoping to have the report out, so very, very soon. And historic funding levels, and I know we've just got a couple minutes left. This is information I shared with the board last time we met and wanted to share with you now. And essentially, it just points out over the past 5 or 6 years what the trend has been. So the big number on top is the amount of grants that MetroPlan, was involved in pursuing, from 3 to 7, and then the amount of money that we actually asked for is the blue bar, from 10 million to 33 million, and then the orange bar is the amount of money actually received. And I need to point out, this is one, and this isn't money that comes right to MetroPlan. We may be involved with the project and be part of the success of the community, but since we have an increased role in trying to certainly not trying to steal anybody's thunder or credit for it, but for my board wanted to share, how we have been involved in putting some additional focus on funding in recent years and what that trend has looked like. And I'm just going to close with a really specific example about this. The pedestrian grant is something that MetroPlan was aware of, partly from my prior history with Mountain Line, and worked with Mountain Line, and then connecting the dots with the city and bringing it to these organizations to say, can we work together? And the reality is, because of the leadership of the city manager and the Mountain Line CEO, the grant was pursued and received, and you guys are getting it done. So I really want to give credit where it's due. We had a small part in it, maybe in identifying things. It really, you're the organizations who are making it happen. So I want to recognize that. And Mr. Chairman, I think I'm out of time.
And you did awesome with your time, Jeff. Thank you very much. So unless there's any other questions, comments for the good of the order, I will adjourn the meeting at 3:30 p.m. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for everything, and thank you, everyone.
Well done, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody.